On the BuzzBeat of this Sunday, a media explosion over the James Comey testimony, with some journalists saying he damaged President Trump and others saying he confirmed that the president did nothing illegal.
The president brings in the FBI director and says, please stop your investigation. Right. If that is an obstruction of justice, I don't know what is.
What the president was doing was trying to sort of seduce him, but seduction is not an impeachable offense. Well, perhaps in the 90s, but it's not anymore.
If you're a Republican, I think you've got specific things you can feel as if you can defend the president on, but atmospherically, big picture, this is still a horrendous day for this president.
And politically, I thought it was very damaging to the president.
Today really was, as it was predicted to be, the worst day of the Trump presidency, and Donald Trump knows it.
The media and the left, they wanted Watergate, they got a water balloon. Because everything we found out about Trump, we already know.
What standards should the press use in judging the president's conduct in the Russia investigation? The president hitting back at a news conference.
No collusion, no obstruction. He's a leaker, and frankly, James Comey confirmed a lot of what I said, and some of the things that he said just weren't true.
But the media hardly buying his claim of complete vindication. Comey also going after the New York Times.
That report by the New York Times was not true. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, in the main, it was not true.
Is he right? And there was this striking admission from the former FBI chief.
I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter.
It was leaking against Donald Trump. Does that undermine Comey's credibility? Plus, Bill Cosby finally on trial for sexual misconduct. Do the media still care about the excruciating allegations against America's tainted TV dad? Or are they treating this like an old rerun? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. It was a buildup of Watergate proportions, with all the broadcast and cable news networks carrying the Senate hearing in which the former FBI director made a series of allegations against the president.
The administration then chose to defame me and, more importantly, the FBI by saying that the organization was in disarray. Those were lies, plain and simple. I don't think it's for me to say whether the conversation I had with the president was an effort to obstruct. I took it as a very disturbing thing.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage of this very intense week, Jillian Turner, former White House official in the past two administrations. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, both are Fox News contributors. And Juan Williams, a Fox News political analyst and co-host of The Five. Jillian, is the media takeaway from this hearing that it was a terrible, horrible day for Donald Trump to be called a liar by his own former FBI director, or is that the whole picture?
I think the bigger takeaway for the news media at large coming out of this hearing was that it was an early Christmas gift. I mean, 19.5 million people apparently tuned in to watch this live on television. Journalists had stuff to write about and pontificate about for days leading up to it. It was a sort of ratings and interest generating bonanza. So I think that's the biggest takeaway actually for the media, outside of who was right, who defamed who was wrong, who leaked what. The big picture here is that this is really like a news story relating to the administration that was of Super Bowl-like proportion.
It was good for the biz.
It was definitely good for the biz.
Does the Comey indictment of Donald Trump, and that's what it was, a political indictment, happen to match the media narrative that the president is engaged in some terrible cover-up?
Well, that's one of the dangers with the hype that we saw leading up to this. I mean, this network and other networks ran countdown clocks, which kind of made for days, yeah. Which makes the journalistic impulse be to get something major out of this. It's not that there wasn't major information to come out of this, but it wasn't necessarily what the media were expecting. I mean, you had these storylines going into this, that there was collusion between Russia and Trump. That was completely blown up by the testimony. But we have another storyline that we should also be pursuing, which deals with a sort of surreptitious campaign by current or former Obama officials and other people in the administration to leak information selectively in such a way as to make things sound nefarious. We got a lot of information that way. But because the media kind of went into this wanting it to be a really bad day for Donald Trump, they think it's somehow news breaking that some people think Donald Trump doesn't tell the truth. as opposed to something we've known for a very long time. I think they missed some of the other really big storylines that we learned a lot more on, too.
You're basically saying the narrative had largely been set in advance. Juan, let me play for you what the president said the day after the hearing, in response to a question from ABC's Jonathan Karl.
So he said those things under oath. Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%. I didn't say under oath. I hardly know the man. I'm not going to say, I want you to pledge allegiance. Who would do that? Who would ask a man to pledge allegiance under oath?
Juan, you're not under oath here, but what's been the media reaction to that comment by the president and also to the Comey hearings as a whole?
Well, it's Comey versus Trump. And so you have, it's like a wrestling match, and you have people who align with the hero, and their hero could be, and remember, in previous incarnations, Jim Comey was a hero to the left, remember going back to the Ashcroft Justice Department, and then he was a villain to the left in the Clinton situation. Now he's a hero to the left again in this situation. But Trump has his backers. I don't think there's any question. If we just focus for a moment, Howie, on the media, you could watch different channels. I'm here citing my Fox 5 co-host, Dana Perino, who said if you watched one channel, you would read that Trump was totally vindicated, which is Trump's language. But if you watched other channels, and if you read newspapers, in specific the big newspapers, you would think this was a man who was facing charges from the former FBI director that he was a liar and undercutting his administration's veracity.
To the high ground here, which is, what standard are the media using? And it may, of course, depend on where you sit on the political fence, because one standard seems to be that there was a cover-up, but a cover-up of what? This still seems at this stage to be no evidence of anything at the bottom of this, meaning this alleged collusion with Russia that has not been proven.
So to bolster Juan's point and Dana's and speak to your question, this was the most polarized coverage of a news story I think we've maybe ever seen, in the sense that...
Or at least since last week.
Well, I certainly think in a sense it was more polarizing than even the election cycle, because that's supposed to be polarizing.
Right.
That's the whole point. You're supposed to figure out... Exactly.
Yeah.
This is not supposed to be that, and it turned out to be that way. What I'll say about Director Comey is that it's fairly regular at this point for a current former senior government official to try and really bend and shape and provoke certain outcomes in the media to try and benefit themselves. What was a little bit unique here is the degree to which we saw a former FBI director actually try to incite the special investigator, essentially and potentially a criminal investigation of the president.
Which he acknowledged.
Very skillful political machinations there.
Give me a reality check here on the hypocrisy question, because it seems to me that some liberal commentators are saying what Donald Trump did was horrible. It doesn't matter if it leads to impeachment or not. And some conservative commentators are saying whatever Donald Trump did is okay because he didn't break the law.
Well, it does seem that people aren't letting the facts determine how they cover these things. And there is a lot of difficulty here in that we do need to put things in context. I mean, there are these issues of truth-telling that really are important. And Donald Trump does have a history of being fast and loose with how he talks about things. In some ways, the most surprising thing about this whole testimony was that he was telling the truth when he wrote in the firing letter that Jim Comey had told him 3 times that he wasn't under investigation, something that Comey's very close friends told us was not true. So Comey, who has presented himself as this Boy Scout, goes and gives testimony that made him seem like a grade A bureaucratic operator, leaking documents, leaking government documents for political purposes. And so if you think that Donald Trump had a lot of credibility to lose, you think that that was a bad day for him. If you think that Jim Comey had a lot of credibility to lose, and I would say he did, it was a much different day.
Right. It is true that some of what James Comey said was helpful to the president because it did confirm part of the president's account. And Comey himself said, we played at the top, I'm not suggesting obstruction here, although clearly he was, I think, hoping others might draw that conclusion.
Right, and specifically Robert Mueller, who is now the special counsel in this case, Howard. But I think that what we have to keep in mind here is that, just in this situation Molly was discussing, did in fact Jim Comey say, hey, to Donald Trump, you're not under investigation? He confirmed that he said that. But then the fact that he described the meeting with Donald Trump in terms where other people are asked to leave the room, where Donald Trump, the president, says, I hope you can see your way to let it, suggests that, in fact, now Robert Mueller will investigate whether or not in fact, that President Trump is guilty of some obstruction.
All right, let me get a few more things in here. So on this question of how the media are portraying Comey, Molly sort of hinted at this. I looked up some of the newspaper accounts. New York Times said he was a Shakespearean figure. Washington Post front page headline, blunt and folksy. The press is largely portraying Comey as something of a hero. He's got the white hat, according to most of the media narratives. True or false?
True and false. Because what I took away from this hearing with all my preconceived notions about the FBI director is really that, number one, he is a very skilled political operative. He's clearly somebody who knows how to achieve objectives and goals he wants in the Washington universe of things, but he's still not a partisan.
But the press likes that. The press likes somebody, even if they're leaking, who is kind of seen as a savvy Washington operator, which is precisely what they think.
But you can do that. He's showing that you can do that without being a partisan, because he's really angered and alienated people on both sides of the aisle at this point.
This is the whole problem, though, with the media coverage of this. They have incentives to be friendly to leakers. We actually had evidence from this hearing that he had leaked as early as April. There was a story in April in the New York Times about how Comey felt about a conversation with Lynch. He referred to that in testimony, so we know that he was somehow getting this word out to the New York Times then. And we also have information that he gave false testimony when he said that he had never kept notes on a previous president. Well, Barton Gellman wrote a book that seemed to take notes from Jim Comey's meeting with George Bush there. When the media aren't skeptical enough of someone, that I know they like Comey, and I know they want him to give him the goods so they can get this guy impeached, but they're not being skeptical enough because they need to analyze what he's saying, whether it's truthful and where it's not truthful.
But Molly, it's not Jim Comey. You know, this narrative, which has Jim Comey versus the president, let me just suggest there's one man in office who's the leader of the free world. That's the President of the United States. Jim Comey now is a formal official. He may have a grudge. He may be a fired guy. But his credibility versus Donald Trump, I don't know.
But we have this overarching narrative that goes back months of intelligence officials selectively leaking information to make it look like
Donald all the time in this town.
But we have to deal with this as a media question, whether the media are being responsible when they're just receiving these leaks that were designed to make it seem that Donald Trump was under investigation for collusion with Russia, when that's the one thing that we actually learned from this testimony wasn't true. That's a media.
I need to jump in. People leak all the time in Washington, but Comey, I think, has always presented himself as kind of like the by-the-book prosecutor who didn't engage in that sort of thing. All right, so what was overshadowed here was Comey talking about Loretta Lynch and how she instructed him to call the Hillary Clinton email investigation a matter, not an investigation. The press didn't care. Comey was right. We called it an investigation. And the most overlooked story of the week, the president nominated Christopher Wray to be the new FBI director. That story lasted about 2 hours until it was swallowed by the Comey hurricane. All right, now let us know what you think. Media Buzz at foxnews.com when we come back. Comey's harsh criticism for the press in that hearing, and later. Did the president stay off Twitter on the day of the hearing but then roared back? Why so much media criticism over his tweets?